blink and you miss it. The fall 2020 anime season was one of those sort of deals that ended before I really got comfortable with it. Most of the anime took too long to get off the ground for me to really solidify my feelings about it, or it was genuinely good and I refused to believe that it was already almost over. Which is leaving me in a weird place, where most of the shows were good, but I couldn't really call them great. And at least 2020 is going out on a high note. So let's cap this miserable year off by talking about anime. But before that, if you're liking the content I'm putting out, why not hit the subscribe button and maybe the bell notification too? Anything to help the channel grow, right? Let's start with those highlights. These are the shows I'd recommend people to check out because I like them for one reason or another, and lucky for me, we had a good spread of the sort of content I like, from action, comedy, horror, and some of the edgy shit too. So let's break these down. If you didn't watch Akudama Drive this season, you made a mistake. The show was amazing from start to finish by packing some awesome animation into a cyberpunk heist story that you're not likely to see in anime again, following an ordinary girl as she's pulled into the criminal world of Akudama by trying to be a good Samaritan and trying to return a dropped 500 yen coin to one such Akudama. She finds herself roped into a plot to rob a train and deliver some kids to a spot. All while we, the audience, learn bits about the world, how it got into such a shitty state, and what motivates these people inhabiting it. Studio Period pulled out all the stops and making as visually engaging of an experience as possible, with interesting camera work, detailed environments, and fluid action choreography that just made this spectacular. Not just a nice looking series, but one that drips personality. Adachi and Shimamura was a quirky, slow-paced romance story between two delinquents at school, as they skipped class to slack off by playing ping pong all day. That sounds boring phrased like that, but the series takes an introspective look at two youths falling through the gaps of society as they haphazardly end up in one another's orbit, and build the connection they're so desperately missing. Adachi is a hardcore introvert who can't really stand socialization, so she avoids class, and Shimamura has a hard time keeping pace with others, so the effort to maintain relationships is mentally exhausting, and so she just doesn't bother. But that doesn't mean that they're antisocial. This is a journey of discovery as these two girls discover what love and close interpersonal relationships are, and it's told in a metaphor-laden way to keep it visually engaging for the audience, as long stretches of the series can be pretty much just monologue. But don't let that dissuade you from a very well-written character study on personality types, not often understood or well represented in anime. Jujutsu Kaisen is an absolute given to be here. The shonen battle genre is probably a turnoff to a good number of viewers, but this series certainly doesn't begin and end with that. The depth in themes, characters, and genres this series covers isn't easy to convey, as while it's predominantly a shonen battle manga adaptation, it expertly incorporates strong horror elements, varied comic relief, and touching moments to build a connection with the cast. With MAPPA handling the adaptation, there were initial worries about this series looking nice, but those fears were quickly squashed within the first episode. Absolutely stunning camera work and fight choreography that's just as good as some of the best stuff in Akudama Drive, or arguably even better at times, and certainly more consistent. Jujutsu Kaisen is one of those shows that has something for everyone, and you'd be remiss if you didn't check it out. Majo no Tabitabi was something completely different, wrapped in a familiar package, and certainly not what I was expecting from this anime. On the surface, and after the first episode, the series pitched itself as an episodic adventure following a young witch as she travels, and it does deliver on that. However, the framing and narrative symmetry between the protagonist Elaine and her hero Nike create a fairy tale-esque aesthetic. Elaine grew up reading these fantastical stories that inspires her to travel so that she can create her own, but also in the old school sense that fairy tales are pretty damn dark, which contrasts with the otherwise bright characters and setting. I wasn't expecting the Brothers Grimm with cute anime girls, but that's what I got on more than a few occasions. And tying that together was a nicely animated series that just looks beautiful on pretty much every frame. While the story might not be the most engaging aspect, the strong world building and characters are intriguing enough to pull viewers along, and that with the cute anime designs and darker themes makes this stand out. Maou-jou de Oyasumi is honestly something I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I did. A series about a kidnapped princess locked in a demon lord's castle awaiting rescue so all she does is sleep didn't strike me as the most interesting setup for comedy. Within the first episode, I was even ready to write off the comedy as repetitive, but luckily I stuck this one out. This one has pretty straightforward subversion of the typical demons bad, humans good narrative. Demons being fed up with their mistreatment and striving to save their race in a climactic showdown, and the human princess walking all over them with her selfishness is funny. But the series subtly builds these goofy relationships by showing how the princess sways the demons and how she actually prefers living with the Demon King due to how well she's treated there. Also, I'm sure the lack of royal duties is pretty nice. Taking the epic showdown and turning it into a slice-of-life comedy commentary on the tired fantasy tropes in games and anime works well, especially as the cast expands. Definitely worth checking out this season. Tonikaku Kawaii is another comedy series I found myself really enjoying due to its simplicity. So many romance comedies struggle to either be funny or make the romance believable, but this series manages to do both, mostly by showing why the couple in question works as a pair. It plays with most of the tropes rom-coms use by subverting those as an almost satire of the rom-com genre itself, and that's actually pretty genius. This series is low stakes, but it's also funny and has the right amount of fluff. An absolute must-watch for anyone interested in romance anime. Now on to the middle-of-the-road shows that were just okay. These are the series I tend to give conditional recommendations for people to check out because they did one thing well, or a few factors were holding them back. Noblesse was kind of just there this season. There were some parts of this series that were legitimately entertaining, but on the whole, I found myself pretty numb to what we got. The entire elder race of beautiful immortals with psychic powers sounds cool, especially when you throw in a secret organization out to take over the world with modified humans too. But that's incredibly detached from the bread and butter of this series. That being the main badass Rai's daily interactions with his friends as they try to live a normal life and eat ramen. And I don't hate that aspect of the series, honestly, but it doesn't mesh well when the series flips between these two settings every few episodes, without ever really seeming to resolve the build-up that it had going on, and that's just bland. Basically anime Twilight at this point. I guess check it out if you're bored and looking for something akin to vampires. Assault Lily Bouquet was another series I couldn't really make heads or tails of in terms of tone. The magical girls fighting an invading alien force that uses magic sounds interesting, especially since they do so by using magic to amp up their physical prowess and swing giant mech swords that are also guns. But this series chooses to marry that with some slice-of-life school setting that's gratuitous with its lesbian tones. And I don't mean that it's gratuitous that they are lesbians, but more that they're sexualizing the fact that they are lesbians. I like the girls fighting monsters because that's well done and it can hit some dramatic beats well, and the school stuff makes for a decent Yuri comedy romp with some quirky characters, but there's no real segues between these elements. The series smashes these together with the grace of a hammer on glass, and that's a shame, because aside from the individual elements being nice, the series looks good too. Too bad it just doesn't feel cohesive. Kimi to Boku no Saigo no Senjou Aruiwa Sekai ga Hajimaru Seisen, or I guess if you want to not be obnoxious, Our Last Crusade or The Rise of a New World, has a decent plot to follow. The technologically advanced empire fighting a magic-using witch sovereignty is an interesting backdrop to the sword-wielding knight and ice-using princess romance. The characters have good chemistry and bounce well off one another to make for endearing interactions. But what I really didn't like about this show was just how slow the story moves. Don't get me wrong, there's a definite progression, but from the time the whole romance tension between the two leads is established to about episode 10, everything just seems to be in a perpetual state of about to go down. The war between the two countries is about to ramp up, the two leads are always about to meet each other, and this big thing is always about to happen, but it never really seems to amount to much, so it's just hard to stay invested when the status quo is so reluctant to change. I guess check it out if you want some like shonen romance shit. There could be worse wastes of your time. Kamisama ni Natta, or The Day I Became God, was a show I thought I would end up loving by the end. This sets itself up as one of those more heartfelt pieces that has a tendency to sneak up on you. It's presented as a fantastical premise in a mundane world, filling itself with fast-paced humor and a general sentiment of, is this actually fantastical? That's all on hold until it becomes relevant, as the series focuses on characters and their relationships so the audience has sufficient emotional investment for when the show pulls the rug out from under you. This is the key visual novel approach to storytelling, and it's pretty successful at making anime darlings if I do say so myself, but I found this one lacking in emotional payoff. Don't get me wrong, I like the characters, but I'm not entirely sure I buy the evil subplot that threatens to change the status quo due to how much screen time it got while seemingly inconsequential it felt. The sudden boom, let's take the main heroine away, while the cast was unaware and didn't affect the change at all, leaves this one feeling hollow. So mostly a good comedy with some decent attempts at feels. Higurashi no Nakokoro ni Go is sadly predictable. I really like the first season of Higurashi because it's meant to be a shocking mystery that makes no sense until the answer arcs, but Go feels like a shallow rehash with a few twists to spice things up. It has some of the elements of what I liked about the original Higurashi series, but it lacks punch because it plays the arc straight, so it's easy to half pay attention to things until they're actually different. And that sucks, though it is well animated and feel like plausible what-ifs to the original arcs, and that's kind of neat, but not neat enough to carry this to greatness for me. So at the end of the day, it's just kind of middle of the road. Now on to the shows I thought were just flat out bad. These are the ones I really don't recommend people to check out because they're either a waste of time, or just can't string a story together to save their lives. So let's take a look. Ikebukuro Westgate Park was a disappointment to say the least. This being a different sort of story about an inner city cast with gangs immediately stood out to me as unique. But the series chose to go with a heavily sanitized version of gangs, romanticizing it, and then dabbling in the darker elements like drugs, loan sharking, and intimidation. All of which were activities the gangs didn't engage in, because they're the good guys. Get it? On top of that, I was really interested in the slight detective elements initially introduced, but after a few episodes it was clear this was more a slice-of-life light mystery series that didn't go hard enough to be engaging. I couldn't really get into this one because, well, it lacks weight. Kami-tachi ni Hirowareta Otoko was mostly boring, and I know a lot of people like the slice-of-life isekai stuff where it's incredibly low stakes. I understand that that's what this series is going for, but that doesn't make it super interesting when the characters still lack any sort of challenge. Even though that's practically a rule of the isekai genre at this point. I don't as a rule dislike low stakes isekai, but this one just lacked consequence entirely, and that made it really hard to care about the cast at all, especially since most of them are vehicles to praise the protagonist. The guy going to another world living as a hermit, and then getting to be best buds with a noble family as he fixes their problems and starts a business, leads to a sort of and then type of storytelling rather than a but/therefore structure, and that just wasn't gelling for me. Iwakakeru Sport Climbing Girls was a goddamn mess. This show was boring on top of cliche, on top of low effort. Miserable animation, stiff characters in both movement and personality, and how the series hits its story beats was predictable. Laughably so in most cases, like the antagonistic girl becoming the friend/rival, and the usual tournament story beats having the main girl make a big splash, but she's not ready to be a top contender, so she has to go train. Yeah, you could see that all coming. I didn't have high expectations for this series going in, but I still found myself disappointed. The series looks bad and isn't worth your time, unless you're really into climbing, that is. Maisetsu was almost okay, but it failed at landing in that camp due to a lack of identity. Sadly, the stand-up portions of this show were some of the more entertaining stuff on offer. I say sadly there, not because I was expecting them to suck, but because they were so few and far between. It actually makes me sad that there just wasn't more of it. I would have enjoyed a show that was a lot more about the girls struggling to break into comedy, but instead we got basically a Lucky Star ripoff about 10 years after those stopped being popular. The cast is incredibly derivative, and the majority of the humor in the series is typical teenage girls talking about their lives with the occasional humorous observation. And you know, there's a million of those, so I ask myself, why this one? Senyoku no Sigdrifa, or Warlords of Sigdrifa, could have been good even. My initial impression of this series was that it would be good, but it failed hard at delivering on its premise. Pitched as girls given divine protection fighting an invading alien force in planes, it is that but fails at carrying emotional weight most of the time due to how wacky the cast is. The main character comes off as broody at first, but after only about one episode she loses that and just ends up going with the flow. The rest of the cast just goofs off, filling a comedic relief role until you're supposed to suddenly realize it's serious. But mostly, the show lacked tonal consistency, going from serious to lighthearted to literally what am I watching, then back to super serious. And that's confusing to viewers since they don't know what to expect episode to episode. Easy pass to be honest, because there's just better shit out there. So with that, 2020 is finally in the books. And I have to say, fall was a pretty solid season, with a ton of shows on offer that were worth the watch. Let's hope 2021 can keep the pace going forward. And I know, that's going to be a hard act to follow. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and I know you already subscribed, but check on that just in case for me. You can also support me on Patreon, where for just $1 you get to vote on what shows I watch next season, plus some other cool perks too, you know. Like hey, you can also join my Discord with a link in the description. Patrons get a special role in there. As always, thanks for watching.